Hello friends, and welcome back to my channel. Thanks for being here. Please like, subscribe, and if you get through the video, leave me a comment at the end. Be much appreciated. So today I'm going to talk about fascist tactics. It's a two-parter. This is the first part. I should also just say that these tactics that we're going to discuss are used by both the far left and the far right. We just, at this point in time, are seeing more of a rise in the far right than we are in the far left, which is why why I'm discussing it and why I'm calling it fascist tactics. Also, in today's video, excuse me, we're going to I'm going to talk about a couple of things that are not necessarily tactics. One is a theory, and the other one is a concept. But I want to sort of put these across so that in the next video you can sort of start to tie the two videos in, right? So you can see in part two, I'm going to talk about conspiracy theories, propaganda, lies, censorship, all those sorts of things, all those sorts of tactics that are used, demonizing of the other, etc., etc. So today we will start off. What I have is I have a 31-page article of which I'm definitely not going to read the whole thing. I'm just going to skim over a few bits initially, just to sort of set the stage. There is a link for this article in the description of the video. So if you do want to read the whole article, just go to the description and click on the link, and it should take you right there. So let's get started. Common characteristics of fascist movements. There has been considerable disagreement among historians and political scientists about the nature of fascism. Some scholars, for example, regard it as a socially radical movement with ideological ties to the Jacobins of the French Revolution. Others see it as an extreme form of conservatism. Some find fascism deeply irrational, whereas others are impressed with the rationality with which it served the material interests of its supporters. Similarly, some attempt to explain fascist demonologies as the expression of irrational, misdirected anger and frustration, whereas others emphasize the rational ways in which these demonologies were used to perpetuate professional class advantages. And finally, some consider fascism to be motivated primarily by its aspirations, i.e., by a desire for cultural regeneration and the creation of a new man. Others place greater weight on fascism's anxieties, on its fears of communist revolution, and even of left centrist electoral victories, which is kind of where I sort of lie, left centrist, just left of center, etc., etc. Keep this in mind when we get to the horseshoe theory, because the horseshoe theory kind of blows a lot of this. This applies to what I would say fascism was 100 years, 80 years ago, somewhere around there. Fascism today, well, we'll get to it when we get to the horseshoe theory, but you'll see some, a lot of similarities between the far left and the far right, as more so than differences. That's my opinion at this moment in time. Um, so one reason for these disagreements is that the two historical regimes that are today regarded as paradigmatically fascist, Mussolini's Italy and Nazi Germany, were different in important respects. Okay, Nazis were in Italy, for example, anti-Semitism was officially rejected, whereas we know that in Germany, even though the two were like sort of in bed together, Germany was all about anti-Semitism, basically. Let's move on. Opposition to Marxism. So fascists made no secret of their hatred of Marxists of all stripes, from totalitarian communists to democratic socialists. Again, I think I put myself somewhere around democratic socialist or social democrat. Apparently, they're different. The two are different, but not by much. I need to look more into that. But that's kind of where I sit. Uh, Fascists promised to deal more firmly with Marxists than had earlier, more democratic rightist parties, sort of like more conservative type parties. And French fascists, let's move on a little bit. Where are we? Some fascist groups emerged in Japan in 1919 um, to resist new demands for democracy. We all know that they went on to become the imperialists that fought in the Second World War. Um, Despite fascist violent opposition to Marxism, some of the observers have noted that significant similarities between fascism and Soviet communism. Keep that in mind. Both were mass movements. Both emerged in the years following World War One in circumstances of political turmoil and economic collapse. Both sought to create totalitarian systems after they came to power, and often concealed their totalitarian ambitions beforehand. We see that a lot in the states today. Especially with Donald Trump, we see how everything they projection is confession. We see how he denies everything, and then as soon as he wins an election, it all comes. Like I don't know if you've heard of Project 2025. He denied that, and now that he's president elect, he's starting to appoint people into his government who are architects of 2020 Project 2025. All very interesting. This is what they do. They lie a lot. I'm going to talk about the lying and misdirection in part two of this little mini series. Opposition to parliamentary democracies. All right. Fascist movements criticized parliamentary democracy for allowing the Marxist threat to exist in the first place. According to Hitler, democracy undermined the natural selection of ruling elites and was nothing other than the systematic cultivation of human failure. Crikey. We all know what happened to him. Before they came to power, Hitler and Mussolini, despite their dislike of democracy, were willing to engage in electoral politics and give the appearance of submitting to democratic procedures, which obviously Donald Trump didn't do 4 years ago when he declared that an election he's a bad loser basically, and an election was stolen from him. I mean, can you believe it? Can you? Still shaking my head. I'm probably going to be doing this for the next 10 years at least. Every time I do a video, I'm going to shake my head because I still can't believe that he won again. I mean, it just boggles the mind. When Hitler was appointed chancellor, he abandoned his military uniform for a civilian suit and bowed profusely to President Paul von Hindenburg in public ceremonies, playing the game basically. All right, let's move on. Third Reich, opposition to political and cultural liberalism. Although circumstances sometimes made accommodation to political liberalism necessary, fascists condemned this doctrine for placing the rights of the individual above the needs of the folk, the people, encouraging divisiveness, i.e., political pluralism, tolerating decadent values, and limiting the power of the state. Fascists accused liberal fellow travelers of wittingly or unwittingly abetting communism. Yes, I'm sure they did, and I'm sure the communists did exactly the same back then. Fascist propagandists also attacked cultural liberalism, claiming that it encouraged moral relativism, godless materialism, and selfish individualism, and therefore undermined traditional morality. Anti-Semitic fascists associated liberalism with Jews in particular. Indeed, one precursor of Nazism, the political theorist Theodor Fritsch, claimed that to succumb to a liberal idea was to succumb to the Jew within oneself. Can you believe it, eh? Uh, Although Hitler had not revealed the full extent of his totalitarian aims before he came to power as Führer or leader of the Third Reich, he attempted not only to control all political power, but also dominate many institutions and organizations that were previously independent of the state, such as the courts, churches, universities, social clubs, veterans clubs, sports associations, and youth groups. Um, we see that happening a lot in modern Russia, which is now a fascist, right-wing Christian nationalist country. In fact, if you haven't seen my previous video, the one I did last week, if you're watching this live, I discuss countries that are now moving or have moved to become far-right Christian nationalist countries, and you definitely see that there. Even the German family came under assault as members of the Hitler Youth were told that it was their patriotic duty to inform anti-Nazi parents, to grass on anti-Nazi parents, um, give them up to the police. Before fascists came to power, however, they often disavowed totalitarian aims. This was especially true in countries such as France, where conservatives were alarmed by reports of the repression of dissident conservatives in fascist Italy and Nazi Germany. All right, I've got a quick story for you. The first time I was allowed to vote in South Africa was I just turned 18. I just left school and I was doing my national service. Got into the Navy. Eventually, actually became a dog handler, believe it or not, in the South African Navy. And we had a referendum. And the referendum was between two parties: the National Party, which was the party of apartheid, and the other one was the Conservative Partij, or KP, because there is no C in Afrikaans, which is African Dutch, and the Conservative Party. So this was like sort of early '92, if I remember correctly. Nelson Mandela had been released a couple of years prior, and the Nationalist Party, or National Party (NP), was moving towards the abolishment of apartheid and moving towards a free and fair election, a one man, one vote system instead of 5 million white people voting and 45 million black people not being allowed to vote every time the elections came around. Uh, and the KP was even more right wing than the National Party, the Conservative Party, and they demanded a referendum to keep things the way they were, right? And so we had a referendum, and so if you voted for the National Party, you were voting for change, and if you voted for the Conservative Party, you were voting for no change, for the status quo, effectively. And so that was the first time I was ever allowed to vote as an adult in South Africa, and I obviously voted for change. Um, And then the next time I voted was in 1994 when we had our first free and fair elections, and that was my first general election vote. And then I left a few years later and came to the UK, where I've always voted Labour. Um, and yeah, so my point being, we have a Conservative Party, and I believe that they still exist in South Africa. And the UK here has a Conservative Party, the Tory Party, who've just lost their elections to Labour about 6 months ago. And they might be the same in name, but they certainly, even though I'm a Labour supporter and not a supporter of Conservatives here in the UK, they are nothing like what the Conservative Party in South Africa was back in the day, right? So things get mixed up with names sometimes. We shouldn't just always, judge a book by its cover. Like you need, for example, North Korea, right? DP, what's it? DPRK, right? Democratic People's Republic of Korea. There's nothing democratic about North Korea, yet it has democratic in its name. I mean, give me a break. Sorry to detract from that, but to divert, but I thought that was a little interesting diversion. All right, let's move on. After Hitler's crackdown on Roman Catholic dissidents in Germany in 1934 and 35, fascists took pains to deny that they were totalitarianism. Yeah, they always deny. Projection is confession. Project, gaslight. Video number 2, we'll also talk about logical fallacies, things like gaslighting, lying, cherry picking, all that sort of stuff. Right, I think I'm going to move on to the second part of this video, which is the horseshoe theory of politics. All right, so let's move on to that. So, in popular discourse, the horseshoe theory asserts that advocates of the far left and far right, rather than being at opposite and opposing ends of a linear continuum of the political spectrum, closely resemble each other, analogous to the way that the opposite ends of a horseshoe are close together. And over here you can see a diagram of exactly that. Proponents of horseshoe theory argue that the far left and far right are closer to each other than either is to the political center, and I tend to complete. So there are pros and cons, or there are people who are agree with this theory, and there are people, and when I say people, I'm academics mainly, disagree with this, right? Political scientists, sociologists. We'll get onto that. From my subjective point of view, my opinion, from what I see sort of on a daily basis, and I watch a lot of this stuff, I tend to agree with this. I think maybe 10 years, you'll see that some studies come up, and studies are quite old. And when I say quite old, I'm talking like 10 years, 7 years old, but a lot can change in that amount of time, right? And I think now in 2024, we're a lot closer to this horseshoe theory sort of at least being partly correct. Let me carry on. Theory is attributed to the French philosopher and writer of fiction and poetry Jean-Pierre Fay, where I think he came up with it. Several political scientists, psychologists, and sociologists have criticized the horseshoe theory. Proponents point to a number of perceived similarities between the extremes and allege that both tend to support authoritarianism or totalitarianism. And also things like propaganda, censorship, the things that we're going to talk about in part 2. Political scientists do not appear to support this notion, and instances of peer-reviewed research on the subject are scarce. I wouldn't mind actually doing a case study myself on this. I don't know any academics who are going to peer review me. It might be interesting also to do a live stream, try and get people on to talk about this, maybe from the yays and the nays. I find it quite interesting. And I'm no academic, right? Like, sort of my subjective opinion is just that. It's a subjective opinion. And I don't want to go around saying, oh, this is definitely true or whatever, because I might not be seeing something, whatever. Excuse me. Still find it interesting, though. Existing studies and comprehensive reviews often find only limited support. Okay, I can agree with that. Like some support is good, and only under certain conditions. They generally contradict the theory's central premises. Academic studies and criticism. The horseshoe theory does not enjoy wide support within academic circles, but then if you go on, a 2011 study, now a lot of things have changed in the last 13 years. For example, Donald Trump winning a presidential election in 2016, saying it was stolen from him in 2020, and then winning it again with no conspiracy theories or no rigging in 2024. I mean, it's just bizarre, absolutely bizarre. So, like, yeah, not that win is really a horseshoe theory, but still, a lot of things can happen in 13 years these days, it seems. The status quo, sorry, can change on a dime, effectively. All right. Some argue that all extremists across the political left and right, in fact, support similar policies. in a view known as horseshoe theory. However, not only do recent studies fail to support such beliefs, they also contradict them. Again, I tend to disagree with that, again, based on my own opinion, from what I'm seeing. It does go on and say that left and right wing groups represent distinct ideologies. I assume that's distinctly different ideologies, although, come on, like we see how Putin in a right wing Christian nationalist country now is cozying up to China, a communist country, also a dictatorship, North Korea, another extremely far left country. Well, apparently, that's how they would see them. So that's how they would describe themselves, I believe. Uh, so yeah, it's yeah. I wonder if any recent studies. I don't think any recent studies have been done. Maybe like since the invasion of Ukraine, for example. Um, that might have changed, or since Trump lost in 2020. Has there been a study that since then? Yeah, interesting. I might have a look for that. I don't. Well, I have done some research. Obviously, I haven't found anything specific to that. But it would be interesting. Okay, so I think I'm gonna skip. Um, Again, 2014, 10 years ago. The so-called centrist extremist or horseshoe theory points to notorious similarities between the two extremes of the political spectrum, e.g., authoritarianism, which I agree. I think they are very similar, even though 100 years ago they were on a miles apart on a straight line. Today they're not so far apart. They're further apart from the centrists than they are from each other, which is yeah, very interesting. All right, so on to the last final bit of the video, and probably the shortest bit. I just want to discuss something called the Overton window. Uh, the Overton window is an approach to identifying the ideas that define the spectrum of acceptability of governmental policies. It says politicians can act only within the acceptable range. Shifting the Overton window involves proponents of policies outside the window persuading the public to expand the window. Now, here's a diagram for you. The Overton window on the left-hand side, and then sort of like your different states of mind, I guess you could say, or different sections, and what the Overton window means, and what it does, and what somebody can do to it. Right. So there in the middle, you have sensible popular policy, popular sensible. Right. So you've got, for example, United States two-party system. Excuse me, two-party system. Um, Up until the sort of where we now 10 years ago ish, uh, you had a two-party system, one Republican, one Democrat. Slightly different points of view on policy, but for the most part, they got on pretty well. They governed for the American people. They got into office because they wanted to do good for the American people, right? That's their thing, and they sort of like they're in the middle, right? But now, in the last 8 years, you've had like Donald Trump, and who has shifted the Overton window. Now, if you think of the Overton window as a tug of war, like a rope with a ribbon in the middle, two teams either side pulling and both pulling on each other. And if one makes ground, the other moves with it, right? So the other loses ground. So that if you look at that diagram and imagine that block that says Overton window as the ribbon, as someone pulls the ribbon, let's say up, um, then everybody who's below the ribbon moves with it, right? So let's say MAGA and Donald Trump have pulled that window up. So it's gone from that sensible to sensible bracket, and it's now sitting somewhere where it's got policy and unthinkable at the top, right? So that block's now in line with those with that group, and so and that would put you at the current situation, right? You've got Joe Biden and the Democratic White House. That is policy, effectively. They are making the policy, and that's where they sit. And then you've got Trump at the top end of it, at doing the radical and the unthinkable, which is what he's doing, right? Emergency, open your eyes. That is what he's doing. So that they have shifted the Overton window, and everybody else has moved with just about everyone else. I'm sure there's still people on the far left in the United States that haven't shifted. You've got people like, and when I say far left, I'm not talking about Marxist communists, right? I'm talking about the Bernie Sanders and the AOCs. They're still democratically aligned people. They just are far more concerned about the American people than themselves, like the right are. All right. So that's basically what the Overton window is. Go through a quick summary. In the early 1990s, Overton described a spectrum from more free to less free with regard to government intervention, oriented vertically on an axis to avoid comparison with the left-right political spectrum, right? Which very good. Thinking ahead there. As the spectrum moves or expands an idea at a given location, as the spectrum moves or expands, an idea at a given location may become more or less politically acceptable. After Overton's death, his Mackinac Center for Public Policy colleague Joseph Lehman further developed the idea and named it after Overton. The political commentator Joshua Trevino has postulated that the 6 degrees of acceptance of public ideas are roughly unthinkable, radical, acceptable, sensible, popular policy. And that flips as per the diagram, right? So it goes back down again on the other side. The Overton window is an approach to identifying the ideas that define the spectrum of acceptability of governmental policies. It says politicians can only act within the acceptable range. Shifting the Overton window involves proponents of policies outside the window persuading the public to expand the window. And finally, proponents of current policies or similar ones within the window seek to convince people that policies outside it should be deemed unacceptable. According to Lehman, who coined the term, the most common misconception is that lawmakers themselves are in the business of shifting the Overton window. That is absolutely false. Lawmakers are actually in the business of detecting where the window is and then moving it to be in accordance with it. According to Lehman, the concept is just a description of how ideas work, not advocacy of extreme policy proposals. He went on to say in an interview with the New York Times, it just explains how ideas come in and out of fashion, the same way that gravity explains why something falls to the earth. I can use gravity to drop an anvil on your head, but that would be wrong. I could also use gravity to throw you a life preserver. That would be good. Gravity exists. That's it. So I get what he's saying there. Right. So that is where we are going to leave it today. We're just going to finish off here with some common features of fascism, and a lot of these can be attributed to Marxism as well, I would say. For example, less fond of democracy, more fond of dictatorship, pro-military, pro-police, pro-aggressive, pro-imperialist foreign policy, pro-state, nationalist, xenophobic, tying nationality to race, pro-toxic masculinity, pro-capitalism, anti-communist. Well, that's obviously not, you can't tie that because a communist can't be anti-communist at the same time. It's a dichotomy. And racist, anti-Semitic. Well, these days anything's possible. So thank you for sitting through this with me. I appreciate it greatly. And if you have, please like and subscribe. As I said earlier, I could do with as many subscribers as possible. And I am also wanting to do live streams. I would like to communicate with people who are possibly interested in modding the live chat during these streams. Feel free to email me on the address that you can see above here, emergency73@gmail.com, and we can talk. And next week, same time, I will be putting up part 2 to this video. So in the meantime, take care, look after yourselves, and I'll catch you in the future.